welcome back to a new episode of Debt Collection 101. We have a very frequent guest on. We have Greg Ruffino with Williams and Fudge, and we also have Emily, our content creator at Arbite. Today we're going to be talking about how to train your collectors for Reg F. So thanks again. I don't even know what episode or how many episodes you've done with us, but thank you again for joining us. And for those who don't know you, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and Williams and Fudge.
Absolutely, and for sure, thanks for having me back on. It's great to see some friends again in the industry, and for anyone watching, friends in the industry, hello again. Hope to see you out there soon. My name is Greg Ruffino. I'm as a representative of Williams and Fudge Incorporated in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I've been in the industry about 11 years. Our agency primarily focuses on the higher education collections, but we also branch out into some other areas as well, but that is our main focus. And my main role here for the last several years is the director of training, teaching and developing our staff and telling them all the really fun and exciting changes that are happening in our industry.
Perfect. So we're filming this on November 18th. In 12 days, it will be November 30th. And if you're in this industry, you probably know what that date is. So we wanted to just talk to you about how you're preparing your collectors and your team for Reg F. So our first question about that is, which part specifically about your collectors' daily routines do you expect Reg F will impact?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you know, as you mentioned, it's the 18th. The reality is obviously the time is getting really, really close. I will also mention that just because the 30th comes doesn't mean you stop training your staff. It will be an ongoing process, particularly for your tenured staff. People you hire on after November 30th, probably not that big of a deal because they might not know any different, but the training for the tenured staff will keep going. But quite simply put, I think the biggest item for our agency specifically, and I'm sure many others, is going to be the call restrictions, the 777 rule that a lot of people would refer to that as, or the maximum consumer attempts in a 7-day period. Anything under that umbrella of maximum consumer attempts, we feel quite confidently would be the most impactful thing that our collectors are going to have to think through and accept and adapt to.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like that's probably one of the biggest ones that I've been hearing about, and like agencies reaching out to vendors and like making sure that there is something in place for that. I mean, specifically for us, it's all we're getting asked. So I can definitely see that being a huge change.
Yep.
So on the compliance side of things, how are you training your collectors to be compliant under Reg F?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, I'm going to share something real quick on the screen here just to give a proper visual, okay? I have permission to do that. Because when you look at the entire picture of what the different main topics of what is changing or altering under Reg F, it very quickly becomes overwhelming. And for the back end office people, the executives, the IT personnel, the compliance personnel, I'm sure they're all dealing with a lot of stress and under a lot of pressure to get certain things done. Same thing with our vendor partners out there. But when it comes down to who is actually speaking to the consumers, who's actually doing the job of collections on the day-to-day, the collectors, right? The revenue generators, what is it that is super important for them to understand, wrap their head around and adapt to? So the list I have on the screen here, just for whatever it's worth, that's personal to our agency as far as what we believe. The list in general, I kind of got from the ACA How in the Reg F video series and what they broke down. I also got a lot of the stuff from accountsrecovery.net, two entities that I do a lot of work with. They got a lot of great content out there, but I think there's about 12 topics here that are affecting everyone under the collection umbrella, but what really is going to be the day-to-day from your collection staff. So based on my own research, based on all the webinars I'm listening to, based on the people in my office that we're talking about, I presented them this list when I, in the last few months, said this is what we need to focus on training. So on the left-hand side of my screen, the validation notice, the repeated calls, conversations, that's the 777, the new limited content message, and the inconvenient time and place. is what we feel and agreed to would be the main focus of what to talk to our staff about, get them to understand the changes and talk to them through how that might affect their day-to-day. The other stuff on the right-hand side, that long list there, to be perfectly honest, I'm not showing our staff a whole lot of that, if any of it. We honestly feel that most of that stuff would not affect them on a day-to-day basis, or is going to be handled in a back channel way through automation, through other admin staff, or things that just really aren't changing enough or directly affecting the staff on a day-to-day basis. So I'll stop my screen share here, but on the left-hand side, that's specifically what we're focusing on and what we're training them on. And even within that kind of stuff, for example, a limited content message, I'm not asking my staff to memorize that. That's going to be on the screen for them, presented to them. If they make a phone call, I know a lot of people use the word scripting. Not that it really matters. We use the word playbook just because it sounds a little friendlier and less robotic. But we have a thing called a playbook, which is essentially scripting with a lot of freedom leeways. But you push a button when you know you want to leave that message. So you're not memorizing it. It's just, hey, there it is on my screen. It's going to fill in the dates. Today's date is, my callback number is. So it's not a whole big deal for them to adjust into that. Hey guys, it's the Zortman message. It's just got a different name to it and slightly different verbiage. The validation notice stuff, that's a lot of backhanded stuff, back channel stuff, but we make that validation notice available to our collectors so they can pull that image on any given account. And for example, I know now we need to present one of 5 very relevant dates to the consumer. Most of our clients we've agreed with to use a last statement date. I know there's others you can choose from, but our collectors are going to be able to see in the moment if I'm talking to you as the consumer and you don't quite understand or remember this debt in your life, I can pull the image of that validation notice and I can recite to you, hey, we sent you this letter, whether it was email or physical mail. I see a last statement date of so and so forth, last payment date, whatever the case is. So we're giving our collection staff the tools to understand what the new validation is going to include. And I think a big part of this too is to sell to your staff. This is something I definitely wanted to remember to put out there is don't focus on the negatives that we have to do things differently and work harder. It's the positives. I 100% see giving the consumer more information on a validation notice as a positive. It's a industry win to force us to give that information. That there could be a school of thought that says, let's not give that to them. It gives them more ability to dispute. But hey, if you're going to dispute, I want to know day 1, not on month 4, when we've been trying to reach you and all that. I want you to be able to dispute right away so we can overcome it right away. I want you to see these dates presented to you in writing in official form to help it jog your memory. And I want my staff to see that. So we sell to them the truths, and there's a lot of positives here, right? The inconvenient time and place, that's a tough one. And it really comes down to what your systems are capable of doing, what your IT personnel and developers are capable of doing. I'm fortunate here in our office that we have a very talented staff in that regard. And we actually, speaking of today being the 18th, this morning, we released this morning, Thursday the 18th, to our staff in the playbook. They came in and they started to see data that is asking specifically that question. Is there a time that is inconvenient for you? It captures data, we input it, it flags it into the system, it notates the account, makes it visible, it ties into our phone system, and it will not allow certain calls to go through if the collector and the consumer are understanding that there is an inconvenient time. The other stuff that I'm hearing from other agencies, the big topic that we agreed to, the repeated calls, the conversations, the 777 rule, it kind of depends on the agency and how you're set up, right? So if you are mostly on a dialer or completely on a dialer, it's probably a lot easier to a degree to control those items. Your staff, your collectors are not necessarily thinking about who's getting called next and what numbers should be called. It's kind of being fed to them, right? Our agency, again, not to compare to anyone else, but it's individual to all of us, about 50% or so of our staff is pretty straightforward on a dialer for most of the day. But the other half of our staff, the real tenured folks, are working portfolios. And they have a lot of third parties in those portfolios. They have a lot of freedom and flexibility as to who to call, when to call, what number to call, and how frequently to do it. So for anyone out there who is solely relying on your collector to understand the rule, to load the account up in a given moment, you know, collectors are working a mile a minute. And to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I mean 5, I'm going to make a phone call. You're just asking for trouble. So that is probably one of our biggest challenges that we are still overcoming, but we will be overcome by the 30th, is to have some automation and some system blockages to count the discussed debts or the attempts being made in a given 7-day period. And if the collector is opening the account and they started working it on a Monday, and between Monday and Thursday, they made 7 attempts to the consumer. And by the end of the day, Thursday, that 7th phone call was made. They come in on Friday, and if they were to open up that account, there'd be no consumer numbers for them to call. They physically could not let that call leave the building. So we are not relying on any individual to count these calls. It'll be done systematically. I know I just said a lot there. Sorry.
Actually, I had like 2 questions kind of off of that. So the first one is, are you doing Reg F training like every day with them, or do you have like certain days you do it?
Good question. So again, it's kind of interesting that we say it's the 18th and there's 12 calendar days till this thing happens. The reality is we did not even introduce this to our staff until prior Monday. Maybe you have a calendar in front of you. It wasn't this Monday this week, but the Monday before. Okay. Actually, strike that. My days are mixed up. It was this Monday, the 15th. The 15th of November is the first day that we decided to start to show this to our staff. And the reality for us, I think the most important thing is to know your staff. What are they used to being trained? Are you always training your staff months ahead? Or are you giving them things more in a time frame that you feel is better for your staff? So what we didn't want to do was start to talk about these things back in August, September, because one, in our experience, my experience, these things get forgotten very quickly. If it's not happening right away, if it's not affecting me today or tomorrow from the collector standpoint, then okay, so what? I forget about it. And we also didn't want to cause undue panic that was going to last 2 or 3 months. So we've had a lot of focus starting on Monday. And like a lot of you out there, we are actually kind of in a hybrid work situation. We have some staff in office now, but the majority of our staff is still remote from home. And in the last almost 2 years, we've gotten very good at and adapted our staff into a lot of video training or Zoom kind of training and knowing what your staff can absorb. So we have, myself, essentially my job has been, I took that list of 4 items that I showed you, and I essentially made a series of 5 videos. One was the introduction. What is Reg F? Why is this happening? Sell the positives. This is a good thing for X, Y, and Z reasons. It's happening. So you give them a little bit of background. And then I did 4 more videos that broke down those 4 main topics that I discussed, showing screenshots, visuals, and the staff started to see that on Monday. I'm capturing all their questions. I'm updating all my documents. By next Monday, they're going to have a follow-up training video that goes out, because one of our things that we are going to adapt into is this first call resolution mentality. In years past, if someone said to us, "I'll pay you $25," we'd say, "Go fly a kite." That's not good enough. Nowadays, we can't do that for lots of reasons, but we also want to get everything done under this conversation today. So just slight changes in our own personal mentality. So I'm training my staff on different best practices, and we'll put out some content that follows up to answer all their questions. I'll be showing them step-by-step video tutorials. This is what the playbook looks like, things like that. So it's really a matter of knowing what your staff needs. If you feel like you haven't done enough yet, I would avoid emails. Get them on Zoom calls or get them in an office, get them in a training room and have face-to-face conversations with people as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do that with like onboardings for our products. I'm like, if you're not ready to just start it, we'll just wait for training, because everyone's going to forget stuff like that. So agreed. My next question was, are you implementing these before November 30th?
Yeah, there's some things that's definitely the case. I know we didn't want to wait till the 30th if something in development was ready. And I mentioned earlier that inconvenient time and place piece, right? That's always been part of the FDCPA, but really what's happening is there's a much bigger accountability to the agency and the collector to capture that data and to ensure that those things aren't happening. And we released this morning, hey staff, this is part of Reg F. We're going to put it out there now. We'll train you more on it as the days progress, but we needed to make sure it got into production to make sure certain things were working before the 30th. We didn't want to come in on, I think it's Tuesday is the 30th, Tuesday the 30th at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then realize that something like that didn't work. The same thing with our validation notices. We've been working very hard on that for a long time with our vendor partners, and that's going to be rolled out before the 30th, just to start to get that process going. I believe we are also looking with the 777 maximum calls policy and rule there, is to kind of start that ticker or that timer before the 30th. So just to kind of get us ahead, and it's something to consider there as well. I'm pretty sure we're turning that on right before Thanksgiving, because our staff will be off that Thursday and Friday next week. I hope you guys are off too. And it's going to start to allow that timer to start to tick over. So by the time we come back to the office on the 29th, we're kind of ahead of the game already. So we've obviously been preparing for months for this. So we are looking to get a lot of these items implemented, not at 8 a.m. on the 30th, but this week, next week, and a few days before.
Yeah, I love how you said that you're seeing this more as something that we could focus on the positives about, because I do feel like there's already a general trend of like consumer-centric collections happening. So it's great that you can start to just get your collectors in that headspace.
Yeah. So real quick, Emily, with that, the 777 rule, right? Prior to that very defined rule, it really wasn't defined. So for years, we've had our own policy just based on what we felt was the right way to treat the consumer without, we had a policy that put maximums on daily contacts, weekly contacts, spacing out the hours. So it wasn't just blasting someone all day, every day. We already had our own written policies that we felt were conservative and non-harassing to the consumer to begin with. But at the same time, is what kind of guidance did we have? We didn't have any, other than our legal counsel, of course, that we felt was within our own risk tolerance. And one of the things I'm selling as a positive is it's a good thing now that these things are clearly defined, and there's no agency out there making up their own policy based on what they feel is good. Just because you feel it's good, you can't necessarily defend that in a court, right? If the consumer says you're harassing me, I can't really defend that. But if we're following this new 777 rule, I can clearly say we're following the rule. We're following the law, not our own policy.
Yeah, for sure. So hopefully agencies for the most part have been following suit and getting ready for this, but let's say there's an agency out there who didn't even know what Reg F was until they watched this video. What would you say is a good place for them to start preparing for it?
Yeah, a couple of things, and I've not shy at all to plug people out there doing the hard work. I've already mentioned them, and I'll say them again. The ACA, the training zone is something that you should be a part of. Spend the money, it's an investment, but their Reg F How series is fantastic. It's been super helpful to me. Accountsrecovery.net, it has an awesome regulation F video series as well. You can self-train, you can share with your staff, all that good stuff. And then I would assume and hope that the vendor partners that you work with are well aware of this stuff and have some solutions ready to go for you. So Emily, I really hope there's no one in that boat, but in reality, if you are, then as far as talking to your staff, don't email them, get them in person, get them on camera, have a real conversation with them.
Yeah, purely hypothetical, I hope, but
Yeah.
You never know.
You never know.
Well, those were all the questions we had for you, but this has been extremely helpful, amazing to hear really like in depth of what you guys are doing. Because I know you guys have always been a leader in consumer-centric collection. So it's amazing to hear from you, and we really appreciate your time. So thank you so much, Greg, for coming on.
Thank you, friends. It's great to hear from you. And just because the 30th comes and goes, I think that's just the beginning. It's the next chapter of continuous training and adjusting into your best practices, finding new best practices. One of the things I'm going to be doing the very next week or two after the 30th is finding my best people and sitting them down, getting them on camera, talking about, tell the staff about your new strategies. Tell us how you overcome this. Tell us how you're still making money. And it was a slight change so people can see, hey, those are the top money makers and they're still making the top money, and they just tweaked a little bit here and the train keeps going.
Well, thank you again for joining us. I'm sure you'll be back in the future.
Hope so. Happy to do it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.